Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to break down something that is quietly ruining more elk opportunities than bad wind, missed shots, or tough terrain. And that's the advice a lot of elk hunters are trusting. Because here's the reality: a lot of elk hunters aren't failing because they're not working hard enough. They're putting in the miles, they're putting in the time. They care enough to be out there grinding through it. Those aren't the problems. The problem is what they believe is correct. They're building their elk hunts around advice that sounds right, advice that might even get repeated over and over on the internet, advice that works in certain situations but can fall apart in real pressured public land conditions. And the worst part is they don't even realize it's happening. It just slowly chips away at their opportunities season after season. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent elk hunter and outdoorsman. So in this episode, we're going to identify and eliminate the elk hunting advice that's actually holding you back. Not so you can just hunt harder, but so you can start making better decisions, positioning yourself correctly, and finally putting yourself in situations where success actually becomes repeatable. So why does most elk hunting advice fail on public land? A lot of the elk hunting advice that's out there isn't necessarily wrong. It's just built for the wrong conditions. A lot of what you hear out there comes from low pressure environments, private land situations, or ideal scenarios where elk behave more predictably, like maybe peak rut. In those settings, elk move more freely, respond more consistently, and expose themselves in ways that make common tactics look effective. And when that advice gets shared, it sounds solid because in those conditions, it works. But public land is different. Pressure changes everything. It changes where elk spend their time. It changes when they move. It changes how visible they are and how willing they are to respond to hunters. Elk that are actually dealing with consistent pressure don't behave like elk in a vacuum. They compress their daylight movement. They shift into more secure terrain, and they become far more cautious with how they use the landscape. This is where a lot of elk hunters get into trouble. They take advice that was built for one set of conditions and they apply it to a completely different environment. And what should work doesn't, not because the advice is useless, but because it's incomplete. If the advice you've been following doesn't account for hunting pressure, it's missing a critical piece of the puzzle. And on public land, that missing piece is often the difference between finding elk and consistently finding yourself one step behind them. Next, I want you to stop starting with tactics and start with elk. One of the biggest mistakes elk hunters make is building their hunt backwards. They start with tactics. What calls should I use? Where should I set up? What gear do I need? They focus on what they're going to do before they ever understand what elk are actually doing. And that disconnect is where things start to fall apart, because calling, setups, and gear, those are all tools, but they only work when they're applied in the right situation. And if you don't understand the behavior behind the situation, you're just guessing when to use them. Elk behavior is the foundation. Everything else sits on top of it. Where are elk feeding right now? How are they moving through this terrain? How is pressure affecting their timing? What is the wind doing in this specific location? And how does that influence where elk feel secure? Those are some of the questions that actually determine whether your tactics are going to work or fail. Most elk hunters skip those steps. They jump straight to execution without understanding the context behind it and how elk behave and live. And that's why you can have the right tactic in the wrong place at the wrong time. The shift is simple here, but it's powerful. Stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What are elk doing here right now?" Because when you understand that, your decisions become more clear, your movement becomes intentional, and your tactics finally start working the way they're supposed to. You don't need better tactics. You need better understanding of elk. The next piece of bad advice is the hunt harder trap that wastes time. There's a mindset in elk hunting that sounds tough, and it's everywhere. Just hunt harder. I love it. I'm hardcore, man. I mean, that fits right in with part of the philosophy of who I am in life. But you can put in more miles, climb higher, stay out longer, grind it out, and eventually think that it'll come together. And on the surface, that all sounds right. Effort matters, absolutely. Discipline matters, 100%. But effort without the proper direction is one of the fastest ways to waste an entire hunt. Hiking more does not automatically mean you're hunting better. A lot of elk hunters are covering miles through country that doesn't hold elk, or moving through areas at the wrong time of day, or pushing through terrain without ever stopping to evaluate what's actually happening. They're working hard, but they're not getting closer to elk. And over time, that creates frustration because the effort is there, but the results aren't. The problem is they're confusing effort with progress. Progress in elk hunting comes from making the right decisions, knowing when to stay and when to leave, knowing when an area is worth your time and when it's not, knowing how to adjust based on wind, pressure, and what you're seeing in real time. That's what moves you forward. The correction is simple. Stop moving just to feel productive, like you're doing something. Start moving with purpose. Every step should be tied to a reason. Every relocation should be based on sound information, because at the end of the day, effort doesn't kill elk, decisions do. Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations and Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post-Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory. It's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com. Next, let's talk about why chasing elk is the fastest way to lose them. This is one of the most common traps elk hunters fall into, and it feels right when you're in it. You hear a bugle and you go. I'm guilty all the time of that, right? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You catch a glimpse of elk and you move toward where they are. You find fresh sign and you follow it. All of those things can be good, right? On the surface, it feels like you're hunting properly. It feels active, it feels aggressive. But in reality, sometimes it can put you into a constant state of reaction that destroys your positioning, because elk are not standing still. By the time you move toward a bugle, that bull has already shifted a lot of times. By the time you reach where you last saw elk, you've already transitioned to the next phase of their movement. And if you keep chasing those movements, you're always one step behind, closing distance on where elk used to be, not where they are right now. Let me give you an example. I woke up one morning, might not even have slept that night. There was lots of nighttime bugling going on. There was an elk really close to camp bugling. I knew that they had come down. They'd got some water in the evening and they were working their way back up the mountain. And my son and I got out there just ready to go. We were ready in the dark and ready to head in there after him. And we picked our way across the mountain, following the bugle and following the bugle and following the bugle. And every time we felt like we were within 100 yards and surely he's going to come fight us, and he's going to come get some. And this is going to be great. And this went on all morning from, 6 something to, 10 o'clock in the morning as we followed him up over the mountain. This is an example of chasing elk. We were behind him the whole time. I didn't understand at that point that we were behind where they had been feeding. They were heading to bedding. We were never going to catch up to them. The likelihood of turning that bull and having him come back, especially leaving cows, was about 0% odds, right? And once we actually got up there, that bull ended up bedding with his cows. We ended up calling a little bit more. That bull actually ended up coming into us and we weren't ready and we blew it. But The whole point was what I finally understood from that was I needed to intercept those elk. It wasn't going to do me any good to ever be behind them in the morning when they were on their way to bedding. And if I could position myself in those transition areas, I had a much higher chance of success. I had to stop chasing and start understanding elk behavior. The correction is shifting from reaction to prediction. Instead of asking, where were they? You need to ask, where are they going next? What terrain are they using to move? Where are they feeding? Where are they bedding? How is the wind influencing that movement? Where can I put myself? When you understand that, you stop chasing and you start intercepting. You position yourself ahead of the movement. You let elk come to you instead of trying to catch up to them. And that's when encounters start happening on your terms instead of the elk. Because if you're chasing elk, you're already out of position. Now, here's the biggest lie about good looking country. One of the most misleading ideas and pieces of advice in elk hunting is the belief that good looking country automatically means good elk hunting. Big basins, open parks, beautiful glassable terrain, the kind of places that look exactly like what you picture when you think about elk country. And to be clear, those places can hold elk at times. They're capable of it, but capable and currently used based on current conditions and pressure are not the same thing. Under pressure, elk don't prioritize what looks good to us. They prioritize survival, and that usually pulls them away from the most obvious, most attractive terrain and into places that offer security, thicker cover, broken terrain, edges, and areas where wind gives them an advantage. And that's why so many elk hunters spend time in perfect looking country and never see elk. The terrain checks the boxes on a map or from a distance for you, but it doesn't match how elk are actually using the landscape right now. And this is where the shift has to happen. Stop hunting based on appearance and start hunting based on function for the elk. Ask yourself what the terrain does, not how it looks. Does it provide security for the elk? Does it allow elk to manage wind? Does it offer quick access to feed and escape routes? Is it less exposed to hunter pressure? When you start thinking that way, your spots are going to change, and so do your encounters, because elk don't live in pretty, they live where they can survive. Next, let's talk about the advice behind why most hunters never build a system. You may have heard elk hunting is just luck, or elk are just going to be where you find them. No strategy needed, or just take a walk with your bow or rifle. But at the end of the day, the biggest problem isn't just effort, it isn't just luck. It's that most hunters are already doing that part right. They're putting in the miles, the time, and the energy. But if that effort is built on the wrong advice, it leads you in the wrong direction no matter how hard you push. That's where things have to change. You have to be willing to question what you've been told. Not all advice is equal. Not all of it applies to the conditions you're hunting in, especially on pressured public land where elk behave differently and punish assumptions. They punish them fast. You have to start building your own understanding. You've got to pay attention to what elk are actually doing. Learn from your decisions. Connect those patterns. And most importantly, hunt with structure instead of just relying on guesswork or popular opinion. Because when you do that, everything starts to simplify. Your decisions get clearer, your movement gets more intentional, and your opportunities are going to start to show up more consistently. The moment you stop following bad advice is the moment elk hunting starts making more sense. The biggest difference between hunters who get consistent opportunities and those who struggle year after year isn't effort or luck, it's structure. Most elk hunters are operating without a system. They wake up every day and they start fresh. New area, new plan, new approach, and if they don't see elk, they move or blame bad luck. If something feels off, they relocate. And over time, they end up covering a lot of ground, but never actually learning anything from it. And there's no pattern recognition, no feedback loop, no way to build on what happened the day before. And that's what creates the inconsistency. Because without a system, every decision you make will be reactive. Every move is based on emotion or just guesswork instead of real information. And even when something works, it's hard to repeat. Do you think back and figure out why it happened or why it didn't? Because there's no structure behind it, you're not going to be able to figure that out. This is where everything changes. You need a simple, repeatable process that you run every day. My process that I want to share with you is one that I talk about a lot. We try to locate the elk, we evaluate the situation, we position ourselves accordingly and correctly, and we execute on the opportunity. And then, whether it works or it doesn't work, we adjust based on what we learned. So it's locate, evaluate, position, execute, and adjust. That cycle creates clarity. It removes randomness. It forces you to make decisions based on what's actually happening instead of what you hope is happening. And it doesn't have to be super nerdy, but it is going to give you some structure. And over time, it compounds. You're going to learn faster. You're going to stay in elk more consistently. You're going to waste less time in the wrong places. You're going to start connecting the dots, because consistency in elk hunting doesn't come from just working harder. It comes from running a system that actually builds results. Now, if you want to go deeper into elk movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the elk hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how elk actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. If you want hands-on application and real-time breakdowns, we have an in-person Elk Camp 2026 that is built around this same philosophy: structure, preparation, and execution in real terrain. 90% of our Elk Camps are going to be running you through scenarios. You can check that out at backboneunlimited.com. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of elk resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.